Is Bitcoin experiencing a accelerated cycle right now? Because we've never really broken beyond this macro diagonal resistance as we have in this cycle. Every single time prior to the halving, we've seen a rejection from this macro diagonal, whereas now we have seen a monthly close, not once, but twice beyond this macro diagonal. And in fact, we are already breaking to new all-time highs. So is this an accelerated cycle? Let's talk about it in more detail. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future. Like this video if you enjoy content like this going forward, and let's dive right into it. So historically, Bitcoin tends to break to new all-time highs 215 days, roughly speaking, after the halving event. This has been the case after 2020 halving and also after the 2016 halving, when we broke beyond the macro diagonal, retested it as a support, and simply rallied to new all-time highs. However, in this cycle, we're breaking beyond the macro diagonal. We've already broken beyond it convincingly, but we're monthly closing beyond it already once, and now hanging about old all-time highs this month. And here's the thing, because if we tend to break 215 days after the halving to new all-time highs, and we're already seeing that right now, approximately 40 days before the halving, then maybe we are ahead of schedule by 214 days plus those 40 days to make it approximately 260 days ahead of schedule. That's quite interesting, because if we think about it, 260 days ahead of schedule, that then means when we look at this chart where Bitcoin tends to peak 518 days to 550 days after the halving, then essentially that kind of cuts the cycle, the bull cycle, or at least the post-halving multi-month parabolic upside in half, really, because that's 260 days is approximately half of what we've historically seen in terms of how long it takes Bitcoin to rally to its bull market top. Because if we look at the past, 2016 for instance, it took 518 days for Bitcoin to rally to new all-time highs and its ultimate bull market peak after the 2016 halving. And after the 2020 halving, it took Bitcoin 550 days to rally to the ultimate bull market peak. And this occurred after the 2020 halving, so roughly, if we were to see history repeat in terms of Bitcoin breaking to its ultimate bull market peak after the halving, if we were to say that that were to occur 518 days or 546 days after the halving, then we'd see a bull market peak in September or October 2025. So roughly mid-month, mid-September or mid-October 2025. This is if simply history repeated, but we're already seeing that Bitcoin isn't repeating history. It's actually going against the grain of it, because we've always seen rejection in the pre-halving period from this macro diagonal, and then after the halving it took 215 days for Bitcoin to rally to new all-time highs, whereas we're already seeing this new all-time high behavior 40 days before the halving, so effectively 260 days ahead of schedule. So if we were to then say, well, 500 days after the halving, 550 days, 520 days after the halving is where Bitcoin tends to bull market peak. If we've already broken beyond these old all-time highs 40 days before the halving, and it's 260 days ahead of time, then maybe we have to cut this in half. And in that case, that gets us much earlier to a potential bull market peak in this cycle. And that's something to really consider. It really is something to consider if we continue to see such overperformance, because we tend to see periods of underperformance in a cycle. We tend to see periods of overperformance, but we haven't seen any signs of mean reversion. Do we get that sort of mean reversion around a halving where we see a pre-halving retrace and then a multi-month consolidation period? That's never really been the case in a parabolic phase of the cycle. In a parabolic phase of the cycle, Bitcoin just continues to go up with shallow dips in the meantime, but no real corrective periods that last a long time. Here as well, shallow periods of dipping, downside wicking on the monthly time frame essentially, but no real corrective extended period. So dips are the most we can count on once Bitcoin breaks to new all-time highs. And seeing as we're so close right now, breaking to new all-time highs, it makes things a little bit more complex, because if we were to consider a pre-halving retrace, then maybe that pre-halving retrace ends up being some sort of downside wick on the monthly time frame. Maybe it just ends up being a shallow dip in an otherwise powerful parabolic uptrend. So that's something really to think about. And if we're already seeing new all-time highs 260 days ahead of schedule, then November, or at least October and September, being those months for potential peaks, should history have repeated itself. Now, if we just take away 260 days from that, it does make for an interesting 2024 indeed. Instead of September being that peaking bull market top for Bitcoin, or October, maybe it occurs 260 days earlier, which is approximately 8 months or so. So maybe that means that March or February, or maybe even April 2025 is where things could potentially bull market peak if we continue to see such overperformance. Because if we do see some sort of consolidation period, and it's very difficult to see that at this point in the cycle, then maybe that would stretch things out and prolong the bull run. Or maybe we simply break to new all-time highs consistently and just continue to rally like this as we have been for 500 days. But it doesn't seem feasible to continue to rally to new all-time highs upon new all-time highs for 550 days when we're already seeing such price action become 260 days ahead of time. So something to consider as we enter a new era for Bitcoin's price action. We've never really seen price action like this before. We've never really seen the halving coincide also with the ETFs. Historically, we do see a pre-halving retrace, but maybe that turns into a shallow pre-halving dip instead in new all-time high regions. But let's see how Bitcoin still treats these old all-time highs, because we haven't yet fully cleared them. We've made new all-time highs already, but we haven't actually broken beyond here. So something to continue to think about in terms of, does this final major resistance reject price? It is confluent with the pi cycle top moving average indicator that we've been talking about in the previous video. So once we finally clear beyond here, we can become a bit more confident about price discovery and a potential strategy for that pre-halving dip. But if we can't break beyond here, then of course we're going to have to consider this region right over here as a pullback area as we approach the halving event. Historically, pre-halving retraces have occurred. Does that then mean that if we can't break old all-time highs, we'll continue to see a pre-halving retrace? Maybe we do get some sort of dip and pullback closer to the halving, but in any case, history suggests that that pre-halving retrace is 3 weeks away, so there's still time for Bitcoin to continue to enjoy this pre-halving rally phase. So maybe it does break beyond old all-time highs. But at this stage in the cycle, it does look like things are 260 days ahead of schedule. So does that mean that we could see a bull market peak a little bit earlier than we'd expected? In this video, that's what we talked about. I hope this video was educational. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future. Like this video if you enjoy content like this going forward. I'm Rekt Capital, and I'll speak to you in the next one. Speak to you soon.